everyone, welcome back to Amulya's Corner, a series that brings bold voices and big ideas to the forefront of today's most pressing challenges. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Monoswita Saha, Director of Social Impact and the Kyndryl Foundation. From leading global social impact efforts to championing inclusive pathways into tech, Monoswita is helping shape what corporate responsibility looks like in the 21st century. At Girl Security, we believe that national security is strongest when it's inclusive, and Monoswita's work reminds us that inclusion doesn't just happen, it's built through intention, collaboration, and purpose.
Thank you for having me.
So you've led major social impact initiatives around the world. What first drew you to this line of work, and how has your understanding of corporate social responsibility evolved over time?
Great question. So, what brought me here is honestly, growing up, I saw very viscerally that economic mobility, financial freedom was really a means to participate fully in society, meaning you have a voice, you have choice, you have freedom, there's a richness to life. And it was really in my face growing up. I'm originally from India. I moved to the US when I was really young, and our family went back and forth and all around, honestly. And I saw that, this didn't change depending on the community or the country. Like it was just simply a fact. And I've always felt that everyone at least deserves that path to economic empowerment, the ability to participate. At least they should have that path. And so that's always been my inner compass. And I think that's been like the central piece and the central inner voice in every role that I've had. And frankly, that's what's brought me ultimately to Kyndryl here, and it's been the driving force in every role that I've had. My first full-time job after graduating from college was actually to teach in an alternative high school. The students were in and out of the juvenile detention center, in and out of the incarceration system. And that really, I think, like solidified that voice because I realized again immediately it's all about those economic pathways, who can make the leap from school to the pathway or even make that connection. How does that all work out? There's many manifestations. I learned very quickly, like it's definitely not a siloed approach that could be taken, but ultimately, that belief and those types of experiences brought me to where I am today.
It seems like you have a really strong sense of purpose. That seems to be a constant thread throughout, your work. It's also really clear that's how Kyndryl approaches impact as well. So speaking of the Kyndryl Foundation, it launched 2 years after the company itself, which is a really bold and early investment in social good. What inspired that decision and what did it take to bring to life?
A couple of months ago, I was at an event and I was talking about the Kyndryl Foundation and a little bit of that journey and the fact that there is a uniquely short timeline in which the company actually launched the foundation. Kyndryl is still 4 years young. The foundation is just starting its second year. And really the reaction I received when I was talking about all of this is, really? Like y'all did that so fast? Why? And my answer hasn't changed. And it's really a sense of like, why not? We know that there are certain situations and inequities that exist. We know that there are issues with access. We have data in terms of some of the challenges, in terms of what's needed in specifically like technology talent pipelines for one, the sector to grow, for communities, countries to be competitive. And so, with all of this knowledge, why wouldn't we act? And really, the foundation is the philanthropic arm of Kyndryl. And what that means is Kyndryl has values and priorities around progress for its customers and also for its communities. So the foundation is really a very tangible step to really put some action behind those values and priorities. So when the company makes a statement saying that we care about progress in communities, it's not simply a statement. Like there is actually an action and investment behind it. There was no question of why. It was simply, this is something that needs to be done because it's needed. It's going to make us more effective in how we'd like to show up in communities and invest in areas where we're uniquely positioned to invest in. And in terms of how to stand it up, it's a long-term endeavor in the sense that foundations are not, I would say, quick to stand up and they're not meant to be taken down quickly, right? So this is a long-term investment effort that incorporates and involves so many different areas of the business. And it involves leaders at all level in the sense that, there is buy-in from our CEO onwards for this entity to exist. It is also, I think, a labor of love in many cases because it is so long-term and it does require a lot of intention.
Right. It almost sounds like it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't a matter of why, but a matter of when and how we get this off the ground. And so you actually brought up something that kind of sparked my curiosity. So how do you make sure the foundation's work connects with Kyndryl's mission and employees across the world? Because you are such a big entity.
The purpose is really important because the host of issues that any foundation or any social impact program or initiative could tackle is so broad. For Kyndryl, I mean, we're uniquely positioned to look at and invest, I think, in particular areas. For us, for Kyndryl, it's around workforce development, it's around skilling, and specifically, it's around cybersecurity skilling and AI. Why those areas? A couple of reasons. One, the data simply shows that there is a huge kind of like talent skilling gap in these sectors in the sense that actually the demand for trained professionals in areas like AI and cybersecurity is about 75% higher than the talent that we actually have. So actually we know that there is a gap here. Secondly, we know that these sectors pay really well. So, in terms of investing in an area that really does lead to a priority for us, which is around economic inclusion, this is a sector to really look at because we know that these salaries do to lead to those types of pathways. And then three, we also know from our own research, we did a readiness report and we looked at, over 25 industries, spoke to over 3,000 business leaders. And what we heard is that, a number two concern is around talent. And so having all of these pieces of knowledge, like for Kyndryl, this made sense. From a business standpoint, this is also an area where Kyndryl can contribute beyond the financial in the sense of actually having a perspective with grantees around how do we actually develop this particular sector. And then from a needs perspective, all of the data, shows that this is a high needs area. And so these are the types of kind of like, I would say research and like thought processes that our team goes through from a foundational and from a business standpoint to actually make decisions around what's the focus. And it's always around where can we make the most impact? Where are we uniquely positioned to make that impact? And also, where is the need and where can we fit into that?
That is really cool. I think it's really interesting to see how a foundation grows in conjunction with a company, especially one that's so globally distributed like Kyndryl. And this really leads very nicely into my next question for you, which is at Girl Security, we see technology and national security as deeply interconnected. From your perspective, what role can corporate foundations like Kyndryl's play in shaping who gets to participate in these high stakes, high impact fields?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first piece of it is organizations like Girl Security and, partners of the Kyndryl Foundation, the nonprofits, ultimately, these organizations are the ones who are actually doing the work on the ground to expand those pathways. Of course, there's policymakers and other sectors and other players here as well, but ultimately, it's organizations like yours and other organizations and institutions who have a similar focus who are working on these pathways. From a foundation standpoint, or at least from a corporate foundation standpoint, one role is the financial piece of it. So let's be honest, we all know that the financial support matters. Like that is what keeps programs going. But there's also an element of like, how can corporate foundations be a catalyst? So, yes, there's maintaining programs, but from a financial standpoint, many times this type of financial backing that comes from outside sources, such as foundations, acts as a catalyst. It allows a program to expand, it allows for pilots to take place, it allows for testing and innovation. So, one role is simply to be a kind of financial catalyst. And then beyond the financial piece, and this is something that our foundation really does think about, well, what can we do to further the mission, to further the impact beyond the financial piece? So in those cases, there is business acumen that we can share. In our case, it could be information or perspectives around what are the most in-demand practical skill sets in cybersecurity? What are we seeing as employers? So that's information that we can share. And then there's also just the interfacing with beneficiaries themselves. So mentorship, coaching, lending industry experience wherever it's asked for, wherever it's needed, whether that's sending in our experts to speak or to share our own research. So, there is the financial layer, and then there are, I think, multiple layers above and beyond the financial piece. And those are ways that really contribute. And ultimately, at the end of the day, a financial backer has a supporting role. And so at the end of this first year with the Kyndryl Foundation, we're going to see that the foundation will have helped our nonprofit partners upskill 20,000 individuals. Over the next few years, 2 years, it's going to be 55,000 individuals. So when we talk about expanding those pathways, increasing the number of participants in that supporting capacity, it's growing, right? We're already seeing 20,000 additional folks who have skills, access, training, and that number will continue to grow. And we play a supporting role. I think foundations, corporations, financial backers, they have a supporting role, but in that sense, there's so many players at the table who have those types of roles.
Got it. And that's really interesting because you talked a little bit about the catalyst piece, and I thought that was a really fascinating piece of input. And it made me wonder and think, how can foundations like Kyndryl move beyond one-time programs, become long-term catalysts for equity? So, especially when you have fields like cybersecurity and national security, where the barriers can be to entry can be really high. How can we move beyond a one-time program and become long-term catalysts for equity?
One of the ways is, something that we implemented, and I think many foundations and many funders do this is multi-year support, right? Our first year was single year grants. In our second year, we added multi-layer support, and Girl Security is a multi-year partner. That's really a fundamental way, right? Because it gives a runway for organizations to, again, like really think about, okay, this is not one time. This is multiple years. It's long term. And it gives that runway to plan for the future and to really build sustainability into plan. So I think that really is a major piece to think about and to implement. And then it's the partnership. Funding streams do end at some point, but partnerships and relationships don't have to. And we certainly take that approach. I mean, once an organization is in network, they're going to remain in network. And those partnerships and relationships are really about, okay, how do we continue to thought partner? How do we continue to support beneficiaries? How do we continue to extend mentorships, coaching opportunities, tips in the industry, and all of those types of things? Certainly, I think the tangible one is multi-year support.
And that makes a lot of sense in terms of sustainability and impact and accountability as well. You mentioned that you're inspired by everyday stories of resilience. Can you share one story from your work at Kyndryl that has stayed with you and why it matters?
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, we were at an event. The theme was around social mobility and what it takes to kind of achieve that, maintain that. And rather than a keynote, the organizers actually had some students speak. And one of the student speakers shared her story about immigrating to the United States, the melding or the clash of her home culture versus the culture here, stereotypes in terms of gender roles, all to say that she really shared this incredible story of resilience and ambition and persistence that stayed with me. That's essentially a person talking about the impact of investment in a human life. And every time I hear those stories, and I hear them all the time because I'm so lucky to be in the work that I am, and I get to hear what happens with our beneficiaries. But those are the types of stories that stay because behind every statistic is actually a human life. And I never want to lose sight of that. And it's actually those human stories of the transformation that results or the next step and the next step. Those are the things that stay. But this particular young woman and her story has still stayed with me weeks in because ultimately, that's all I needed to hear to keep doing the work that I'm doing, keep showing up for particular partnerships, to continue to advocate for certain partnerships and to really ensure that, this type of work continues.
I love that. And I think sometimes that is such a powerful reminder because, impact like doesn't always show up in metrics, sometimes it's the moments that we don't forget like this. Many girl security participants are still finding their voice, especially in spaces like tech and policy where they may feel like outsiders. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting to carve their place?
It's hard. Like, I think sharing the advice is so much easier than actually following the advice. So I will completely acknowledge that. However, I do think my best advice is take that first step.
Mhm.
That's the hardest piece, right? And at least it has been for me, knowing that in trying to carve out a space and in trying to actually speak and make one's voice heard, that whole process is most likely really, really uncomfortable. And if somebody is able to accept that it's going to feel strange and uncomfortable and out of place and funny and still do it and take that first step and the next step and the next step, it does become easier. Many times when we're in those positions of hesitating because it's new or we don't see ourselves like reflected around the table, it's really hard, but at the same time, we also don't know how much our voices matter. And so I don't think it's very complex advice. I think it's still very hard to follow, but accepting the uncomfortable feelings that come with it is really the beginning to move it forward. And then the other piece I would say is don't overthink it because the decisions, the actions, it's not going to put a stamp of stone on anyone's career pathways. Career pathways are not linear. There's multiple on-ramps and exit ramps and ability to change it and shape it. A decision or an action that a person does or does not take, again, is not going to set anything in stone. So in that sense, hopefully that kind of not lowers the stakes, but makes it a little bit easier to, again, take those first steps.
And it absolutely does because I'm definitely at a pivoting point. And so it's the uncomfortableness of not knowing what's going to happen after graduation. And I'm being okay with that, being okay that there are so many different pathways I can take. And then I reflect back to when I was applying to college, actually, and how I told my parents I wanted to work in national security. And they were like, "What is that? Well, I've never heard of that before." And, they were like, "No, you need to be a doctor or an engineer. Those are your only two options." But it was, taking the first step of, talking to them and being like, "I know this is an unconventional career path, but it's something I want to explore." And then really full circle because now, I get to work with such an amazing team at a national security nonprofit where we're seeing that impact on the daily. And so that advice really does resonate.
If it
And
makes you feel better, Amelia, when I was graduating, I didn't even know that the role that I have now existed. And I'm not sure that it did, right? So that's the beauty of it, right? Things change, they evolve. And it's good because I had somebody given me a job description, I don't know that I would have gone for it or would have even understood it at that point.
you're right. There may not be a job, created for you yet, but you are where you're meant to be. And it's all about taking the first step and, trying new things and exploring. And I'm really glad that our work reflects that. And this leads me to my last question for you. What is your boldest hope for how corporate foundations, nonprofits, and rising young leaders can reshape cybersecurity, not just who's in it, but for what it stands for?
I find that to be a hard question to answer quickly and well because I think there's so many aspects to it. So I'll say this. Cybersecurity is kind of it's in our lexicon now, right? We hear it the way that we hear AI and there are conceptions that pop into one's minds. But I'm not convinced that folks actually understand fully what cybersecurity is. We all know we need more people in the field. We need more diverse faces, more diverse voices. So I think my boldest hope is one, at some point, when we talk about cybersecurity, people have a really strong understanding of what this is and the various layers, maybe not every layer, but a little bit from the personal to the national. And we don't have an issue of who's at the table. Have we expanded the pathways and the ability for participants to get into it? I think my boldest hope is like we just don't ask those questions because everyone really has an opportunity to be at the table if they want to be at the table and they want to participate in the sector. They can because they know what it is. They know how to access the pathways, and there's clear on-ramps into these careers really for the widest sections of our communities and our populations.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight and your vision and the work that you do. It reminded me a lot that, building a secure future doesn't just mean building stronger systems, but it means building more inclusive, more equitable, and most importantly, more human-centered ones. And so, to all the girl security audience that's listening, keep pushing your boundaries. Keep asking big questions and remember the future of tech belongs to all of us. And thank you again, Monoswita, for taking the time to join and talk about this with me. It is truly so appreciated.
My pleasure.
And this has been Amulya's Corner, and we'll see you next time.